Well, hello there. Welcome. You're watching the Weekend Review here on SABC News. Of course, we're coming to you live from our studios in Auckland Park, Johannesburg. And it is the program where we review some of the big stories to come out of the week, perhaps what's been making headlines and, of course, getting South Africans talking. I'm Liezle Wilson. Let's take a look at some of those headlines before we get into the top stories. Although further afield, fighting continues across the Ukraine following Russia's invasion. Closer to home, South Africa recording another 2,111 cases of COVID-19. And in sport, it's a big one as Kaizer Chiefs will travel to Orlando Stadium this afternoon for the DStv Premiership Derby against Orlando Pirates. Those were a look at your headlines. We start off with a look at the Ukraine-Russia conflict, where Russia has declared a partial ceasefire to allow for the opening of humanitarian corridors that will be used to deliver food and medical supplies to the Ukraine. Well, here's SABC News international editor Sophie Mokoena with the latest.
News coming from Russia that Russia has agreed to a partial ceasefire to allow Ukraine to set up those humanitarian corridors. You know that on Wednesday, the World Health Organization pleaded with authorities in Ukraine and also in Russia to open humanitarian corridors. And Dr. Tedros saying that they will be sending supplies, medical supplies. It was on Wednesday, and he indicated that the consignment was to arrive in the border or at the border of Poland on Friday. And indeed, we saw those planes landing, and we saw consignment or medical supply being offloaded. And therefore now the question is, how are you going to get them to areas that are affected, such as hospitals? Because you know, in terms of the laws, international laws during war and treaties, you cannot touch the health infrastructure, but also you have to allow food and humanitarian assistance. And therefore, it's a partial ceasefire that will include for countries to be able to assist their citizens to leave Ukraine. We know that India yesterday indicated that they still have a huge number of their citizens, students in particular, who are still trapped in Ukraine, and they were 60 kilometers to the nearest border, and therefore they can't walk, because if they walk, they are likely to be casualties or they might be caught on a crossfire. And therefore, this will give an opportunity to those countries who are ready to evacuate their citizens to do that. And I think it's not clear yet how long will this last, but it's a reprieve, a temporary reprieve, very, very, very short. We don't know, and it's difficult to even get information because, as you are aware, that independent media, majority of independent media in Russia have decided to suspend their operations. Even ourselves, our correspondents in Russia have taken a decision to suspend filing until Russia is clear in terms of what they mean when they say anyone spreading fake news, because how do you interpret fake news? For Russia, certain information might be construed as fake news, and therefore it's going to be now difficult to get information from Russia.
Right, now moving on to news closer to home, where decades after his body was found hanging in a police cell, the family of Neil Agatha finally have answers regarding his death. A second inquest overturned an initial finding that ruled his death was suicide and absolved apartheid police of his killing. Well, yesterday, Judge Mutsamai Makume ruled Agatha's death a murder by security police. Agatha was found dead in his cell at John Foster Square Police Station on the 5th of February back in 1982. SABC specialist reporter Hasina Gori spoke to Agatha's partner at the time, Dr. Liz Floyd.
4 decades since the death of Dr. Neil Agatha, some answers coming out from the Johannesburg High Court as a judge ruled that the first inquest was biased and many of the witnesses had fabricated their testimony during that proceedings. He ruled that Neil Agat's death was not a suicide, a point that the family had raised from the onset of his death in detention at John Foster Square Police Station all those years ago. With me, I want to bring in his partner at that time, Liezle. Thank you so much for joining us. It's been a long journey for the family and those that, loved Neil Agat. How are you feeling? Let's start with how are you feeling right now, hearing that quite lengthy judgment being read out here at the High Court?
Well, I didn't expect such a clear judgment. It's been 40 years since he died. The initial inquest was done under the most awful, intimidating circumstances and exposed the system of torture by security police of detainees. And at that time, that was a revelation. And it had a lot of implications in terms of particularly white South Africans understanding that torture was the norm, flourishing of organizations to support people like detainees, people who were tortured, people who were assaulted by the police. And that kind of led into the period where COSATU was set up and the United Democratic Front developed, and really was a mobilization of the struggle against apartheid, with 1990 bringing a change in the government. So 40 years later, it's a bit surprising. When the legal team started the investigations in 2017, I didn't think there would be much new evidence to add. They've been very thorough with the investigation led by Frank Dutton. The legal team has worked very, very carefully, and there's been funding from the Foundation for Human Rights. During the inquest, there was an extraordinary amount of information. Detainees who had really been intimidated in 82, had given evidence about their torture, and it was dismissed by the magistrate at the time.
And welcome back. You're, of course, watching the Weekend Review with myself, Liezle Wilson. Some more news making headlines this week. Of course, the Commission, which investigated allegations of state capture, has submitted the third report to President Cyril Ramaphosa. Now, the four-part report zooms in on Bosasa allegations, of course, now called Africa Global Operations. It's alleged that the utility company was used as a front to get kickbacks in exchange for lucrative government contracts. Former Bosasa COO Angelo Agrizzi testified to this, implicating Energy Minister Gwede Mantashe and former Water and Sanitation Minister Nomvula Mokonyane at the inquiry. Angelo Agrizzi was subsequently accused of offering gratification on behalf of Bosasa to former MP Vincent Smith in exchange for his influence.
Evidence around Bosasa under the spotlight. The State Capture Commission has now submitted its much-anticipated third report. During the Commission's work, evidence around Bosasa was amongst the interesting testimonies. During his testimony, Angelo Agrizzi became a star witness implicating top guns of the ANC. Now the damning report is out, the evidence reveals that there was widespread corruption in the awarding of contracts and tenders to Bosasa. The report, amongst its findings, found out that Nomvula Mokonyane, in her various positions, breached her oath of offices in terms of Section 96 of the Constitution. In terms of Section 96 of the Constitution, a member of cabinet is prohibited to expose him or herself to any situation involving the risk of conflict between their responsibilities and the private interest. The report suggests that Mokonyane be investigated for possible corruption.
I do think as well that the National Prosecuting Agency will be under tremendous pressure. They have now a new head of the unit that is going to focus on some of these prosecutions that will need to flow from the Zondo Commission. And I think that it is going to be so much pressure. The NPA is already under pressure. They have a backlog of cases.
During the testimony, another issue that raised eyebrows: the security upgrade installed at the then ANC Secretary General and now chairperson of the party, Gwede Mantashe. On this issue, The report concluded that there is a reasonable suspicion that Mantashe received the free installations, knowing that Bosasa sought through him to influence unnamed office bearers. However, the Commission says there is no evidence that Mantashe acted upon this. Another casualty of the Commission's work was ANC MP Vincent Smith. Smith is already facing pending charges of corruption, fraud and conspiracy to commit fraud. On former Deputy Minister of Correctional Service, Thabang Makwetla, his issue also security installations.
The report will leave the party even more and more divided, because now it's not just about the factions, it's about the report that even implicates those that are at the center of power now, not just those that are displaced from power. So it raises a concern, and people will ask President Ramaphosa, will be expecting him to also do something in line with what was said by the report.
ANC MP and former National Assembly Chairperson Cedric Frolik was not also spared. He will face investigation based on reasonable prospect that further investigation may uncover prima facie case of corruption. Fireworks came when former President Jacob Zuma refused to reappear at the Commission. The Commission says a significant portion of the evidence against Zuma on Bosasa is hearsay, but hearsay evidence is admissible in the Commission's proceedings. It calls for more investigation on the basis that there is a reasonable prospect that such further investigation will uncover a prima facie case of corruption. Responding to the findings of the report, the Zuma Foundation has rejected the findings, stating that the former president wasn't afforded a chance to testify.
The implications of this report on the ANC, the current state of the ANC, and the position of the ANC in government, it is so significant that the ANC should actually make it very clear what they plan to do.
Nhlanhla Khatlhane, SABC News, Johannesburg.
Right, for more on the State Capture Report Part 3 release, we are joined by Levi Ndau, political analyst. Levi, good afternoon, and thank you very much for joining us here on the SABC.
Good afternoon to you, Liezle. Good afternoon to the viewers at home. Thank you for having me.
Part 3 of the State Capture Report has now finally been released. Judge Raymond Zondo, of course, releasing this third leg. And I wonder, just perhaps before we start off, what are some of the things that stood out for you this time round?
Well, firstly, I was not surprised at all with the report, based on the fact that when one was following the deliberations at the Zondo Commission and the evidence that actually came out, it actually pointed at the very same individuals that have actually been mentioned by this report. What stood up for me is that it has actually been confirmed that it appears as if there has been a suspicious relationship between Bosasa and the ANC, and the most of the activities of the ANC, and in the May, the elections were actually being coordinated using the resources from Bosasa. And of course, Bosasa is the one that has been getting a lot of businesses through its link or its relationship with the ANC. What I've also picked up is that there is now an element of panic, especially from those or some of those who are mentioned in the report. Hence now we see the former Secretary General Gwede Mantashe having to quickly run to address a press conference, and also indicating his intentions about taking the report for a judicial review. For me, also, this report would bring the test for the ANC's position in relation to the fight against corruption, and ensuring that the ANC has to stick to what they've actually agreed upon. And also, the position of the ANC has to be clear now in terms of how they deal with individuals implicated in serious activities like the ones who are mentioned in this report.
All right, so you speak about a possible panic from within Levi. Perhaps before we get to that point, I just want to look at the prominent people implicated in the report, including a former president, a current minister and a current deputy minister. But there's obviously been mixed reactions and responses from those who've called for both accountability for the implicated individuals. But, you know, when you look at the action that one anticipates for the president to take following this report, given his commitment to stamping out corruption, but, you know, it's also compounded by, you know, the issue of state capacity and institutional weaknesses, and perhaps even the political will and ability to implement the recommendations, perhaps to see that trust and justice ensues. What do you anticipate on that front going forward?
I think indeed it's a very huge task ahead of the president and those surrounding him. But already we now know the processes that are actually going to follow. Firstly, we're going to have the processes of the ANC, and already the ANC has established a subcommittee that has to deal with matters relating to the report coming from the state capture. Number two, the president still has to go to parliament and talk to all of us about the steps that are supposed to be taken relating to those implicated in this commission. I think, firstly, if we start with the ANC processes, these events are coming at the right time. When the ANC is about to go to conference, and it is about how the ANC has to respond to these serious allegations, and the kind of leadership that the ANC is also going to elect at conference would actually tell the entire nation the actual position of the ANC in relation to the fight against corruption. And when it comes to government level, there is an assumption in society that seeks to suggest that the president has to do everything on matters relating to corruption. There is clear evidence in front of all of us coming from the commission that certain people has to be referred to the NPA. Different state departments have to institute disciplinary actions. Monies have to be recovered. So it will require all of us to be able to do something about the report. But in the main, the NPA should up its game and actually deliver as expected by all citizens. We all know that they've got a lot of work to do, but in the fight against corruption and in support of the political will of the current administration to fight against corruption, one must see the NPA actually performing much better than before.
Well, all eyes will be on what's going to be implemented going forward, and I think that's where the spotlight post part 3 of this report has been released will be focusing on. But to an earlier point that you spoke about earlier on, we're looking at the internal dynamics of the ANC. Perhaps you alluded to panic that seems to be coming through as well. Obviously, we saw that the Commission itself recommending further investigation of Minister Gwede Mantashe in terms of the Prevention and Combating of Corrupt Activities Act. Now, we also know that the Minister of Energy and Mineral Resources, Gwede Mantashe, is going to plan to challenge these report findings, of course, stating that he's going to take it to the judicial review. And I wonder what do we expect to come out of that? In the same breath, do you then believe that implicated ANC ministers should actually be stepping aside at this point?
I don't think so, Liezle. We still have to get to the final section of the report, wherein the recommendations have to be presented. Minister Mantashe, as a leader of the ANC, for me, I think he should have actually waited for his own party to come up with their own recommendations based on the Zondo Commission. I'm happy that when he addressed the press conference, he alluded to the fact that he's a member of the ANC, he's in the National Executive, he's also the minister. I think we still have a long way to go for those implicated to be able to face the music. But all these processes would then assist everyone to be able to know exactly where they stand as they actually unfold. But for me, what is very, very important is that panic or no panic, we just have to wait and see and look at the processes that are actually going to come out of this exercise. But another aspect that we also need to remind all of us is that even though the Commission says they suspect that if further investigations are done, they might still find something against the former Secretary General of the ANC. It's something quite expected and quite normal because those that are in leadership positions are permanently under surveillance, and whatever they do has to be scrutinized. And unfortunately, that is the package that comes with those that have chosen to become leaders in society.
Liezle Wilson, thank you very much for joining us here again. Liezle Wilson, political analyst, again unpacking the latest emerging from the state capture report. Part 3 has been released this week. Obviously, the third installment of that state capture report released by the inquiry chairperson Raymond Zondo to the president. And it's been met with mixed reactions and questions, perhaps more questions than answers at this point as we await to see what the implementation thereof is going to look like. Let's leave that conversation there, take a quick ad break and continue on the other side with more news and updates. We'll be right back. Stay tuned. Right, welcome back. The Weekend Review continues. We've obviously seen in a somber note the family of Andre Peel, the triathlete who was killed after being run over whilst out cycling early last month, has called for justice for their loved one. The tragedy occurred in Lanseria, west of Johannesburg. Late Peel's wife, Sandra, says that she and their 2 children are still battling to come to terms with Andre's tragic passing. She was speaking at the launch of the Cyclist Lives Matter campaign in the Cradle of Humankind in Johannesburg earlier today.
Yeah, I think it's really difficult. I think nothing prepares you for a tragedy like this. As I said, sort of you say goodbye to your husband and 40 minutes later, your whole world changes. So it's been a really, really difficult journey. But we are just so grateful for the army that surrounds us, from the cycling community to our family and friends that have been walking this journey. As you say, it's really, really fresh. But obviously also given how he died, the weight of the investigation and the prosecution obviously also weighs heavy on us, because we have no understanding as to why this has happened, but we also want to know that hopefully that there could be some justice for Andre's life, and that this type of case kind of sets a precedent that all victims in South Africa of crime will be represented fairly from the judicial system. But it's a very tough journey, and having young children has been incredibly difficult, but we are supported by lots of people around us in the cycling community.
Peel and fellow cyclist Jean-Francois Duprier were returning from a training ride when they were hit by a driver in an SUV Porsche. Duprier is still recovering.
Right, another news, of course, today is a big day. Orlando Pirates and arch rivals Kaizer Chiefs aim to reduce the gap enjoyed by pace-setters and DStv Premiership defending champions Mamelodi Sundowns, of course, when the 2 teams clash in the Soweto derby this afternoon. Now, Chiefs and Pirates are 3rd and 4th on the log, respectively. And on that note, that's where we're going to leave it for you today. It has been an absolute pleasure, as always. That's it from myself and the Weekend Review team. Until tomorrow for a look at the week ahead. Do stay safe. It's goodbye for now.